warm welcome to this 4Ds, dreamers, doers, designers, and doubters. And you're allowing people, right, Kazi?
I am, yes.
Good. And I'm just going to do a very short introduction, Hitendra, and maybe when you start, you can give a more deeper introduction. But I was thinking a little bit, and it was 2011 we first met at Columbia, and you had this lecture about the formula of happiness, and I still remember. And it was amazing. It made a big impression on me, and that formula is still valid in many ways, and which is also a reflection of your background, right? Deep into mathematics and so, and then you did this shift in your life towards what you're doing today, and you've always been a person that I admired so much. Hitendra learned so much over the years, particularly the personal leadership, how we see the inner mastery for outer impact, which, by the way, is your book. I hope you're going to be talking a little bit about that. And this community, the 4Ds, is very much engaged, as we discussed, about the meta crisis, right, that we see around us, all these interconnected crises. Some people call polycrisis. We like to maybe to think about a meta crisis because they are all connected. And I am a truly believer that the inner, how to say, our own cognitive capacity is so important in this area. And to address the meta crisis. So I'm looking forward to discussions. I would ask everybody if you can have your cameras on. We're going to have a great 1.5 hours ahead of us, a lot of discussions, a little bit about the practical things. So we have Peter Sandberg that will leave the word in a minute and will be kind of facilitating, and then also Kazi, Casimiro, that will be helping us with all questions in the chat. So you don't need to be focused on the many questions that I hope comes also in the chat. And guys, anytime questions, put in the chat. And without further ado, I probably forgot something, Peter.
Maybe, Geraldo, just tell all the new faces here about the 4Ds.
Yes, the 4D is very good. The 4D is the dreamers, doers, designers, and doubters. It's a community that we are building, a little bit out of the experience we had at Ericsson on the importance of communityship, right? So we talk so much, and that's why one of our first 4Ds was with Henry Mintzberg, which talks about the importance of communityship. And so we are a community that is very engaged and worried about, again, the meta crisis that we see around us, and with different talents, because we are not only Ericsson today, Ericsson people, we have all types of backgrounds. And we are engaging in different formats. So we have from a joint blog to channels like WhatsApp, and also the 4D conversations, the live conversations is an important part of that. And I really encourage everyone to be part of this broader initiative. I'm sure that you will, how to say, enjoy it as not only not as just an intellectual exercise, but also we have what we call little big, so really action orientated little things that all of us can do to impact the world. And so I could, as you see, Peter, continue to talk here, right?
I'll stop you right now.
Yes, but I hope this is just a short pitch.
Yes, thank you, Geraldo. And everybody, welcome here. It's so good to see you. And also, of course, Hitendra, It's I've been looking forward to this. Unfortunately, I couldn't be at sort of like at the prep session. I'm halfway through your book. I'm I'm so happy to see someone that actually manages to build a bridge between the old Indian wisdom tradition into modern life and leadership and business. I think you're doing something really important there. And I also think that a lot of people in business or in the professional lives, this is a topic that is, when you talk about spirituality or just wisdom in general, or even mysticism, that's sort of like frowned upon almost, or people just think it's weird. But I also sense that in this world here and now, more and more people are moving in that direction and realizing that part one, there's more to life than just the material stuff we see, and also that if we cannot really understand who we are as humans or our existence here on earth, then it's really hard to also live a life in a proper way together with other humans, right? And to create a better future. So, without further expectations than those, I leave the floor to you. Welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm first of all just delighted to be in a forum that connects me with with the community that I have a lot of fondness for. Ericsson, with Geraldo, you being a flag bearer of that original sort of partnership that we had forged, and over the years been able to serve and support, a few of the leaders and managers in the organization. It's been very rewarding. And then Sweden, which many, if not all of you, come from, is a country that, I wish I had the opportunity to spend more time there and perhaps even have an occasion to live there at some point, because every time I come, even just to Stockholm, it's been really beautiful to experience that part of the world and the culture. So anyway, so it just gives me great joy. Peter, the way you just introduced the frame for my quest and hunger and work, and perhaps its relevance for today, was so beautifully said, and I'm grateful for that, and for the investment you're making reading the book. My work has been evolving, in sort of like 2 or 3 chapters, and I want to start with the latest chapter and then maybe pull back a little bit and go to some of the other building blocks of it. The latest chapter is that, as you all are noticing and what you're coming back together to convene this forum for, the meta crisis, as you were calling it, Geraldo, we just all recognize that we're living through a very pivotal moment in history. I like to say that, there are, if you look back at history, there are moments of stability, and then there are punctuated by, little periods of instability. And in the instability periods is where society is dismantling the old order and rebuilding into a new order. And for a while, it's messy, it's disruptive, it can sometimes even be violent. But what emerges from it is humanity, next point, or whatever it is, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, the next point. And let's all recognize that, because while sometimes the behavior of people around us can be a little bit painful and disappointing in terms of why we're not being able to solve and why we're exacerbating some of the world's problems, we can also recognize that, wow, just up to 150, 200 years ago, if people had a argument with each other that was serious, 2 men, they would like just go out and take their pistols and do a duel, and one of them would kill the other, and that was considered to be honor. That like if you refuse to do that, we say like, no, I don't want to fight you with a pistol. Like, you would be considered a coward and you would be socially ostracized. I mean, what a low consciousness mindset humanity was living in, back then. relative to where we are today. And of course, if that's the case in the progress between yesterday and today, then why should that not also be the case in the progress from today to tomorrow? Why should we believe that we get it and we know it, and not give credit to future generations to improve on us? And they will. We may go up and down a little bit, and there might be upheaval for a while, but at some point, 100, 200 years from now, people will look back at us and say, like, what? This is the way you guys were living? This is what you were doing? And things which we consider very normal, just like in that era, they considered very normal to protect your honor. And you prefer death to dishonor. There's notion of honor, whatever that means, in a society like that. Today we are left scratching our heads. And so there likely are things that you and I, we don't even know, that we as humanity are not yet fully manifesting, that we will in the centuries ahead, right? So in some ways, these periods of disruption, now you and I, and most of us here, have lived through decades of stability, and now we're living through instability. And this might be the earth inviting us to do our part in this unbroken chain of human progress, where we as a link today in that unbroken chain, we are now meant to do our part and accept that things are going to be disruptive, accept that there's going to be uncertainty, accept that we can't wake up every day feeling entitled to having the sun rise exactly the same way, have the same exact weather, have the same exact situations as yesterday and the day before. No, every day is going to be an adventure. Every day is going to be different. Every day is going to be new. We can't have a feeling of entitlement, expectations. And now what am I going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Right. And so that's the mind frame, in a sense, that I see us being invited to take on, and I see you all doing, right, with this beautiful forum that you convened. So thank you for that. So in that context, I have been studying some of the transformative leaders in history, movement makers, change makers, institution builders, freedom fighters, and others. And what I found among these people are some common themes, which have not, to me, yet been fully manifested in many of the popular uprisings and movements, that we see around us today. And those are themes like I'm referring to the Mandelas and the Martin Luther Kings and the Mother Teresas and the Gandhis of the world, and some of those themes are the following. Like, one is, I find that they approach their work from a place of deep love. They had a deep love for humanity, not a hatred for the enemies, but a deep love for humanity. Mother Teresa was once asked, would you, join us for this anti-war rally? And she says, no, I won't. She said, but if you have a pro-peace rally, I'll come for that. And so that's this idea that, Gandhi would, tell the British that, I'm not asking you to give India its rightful freedom just so that we can benefit economically and, with human rights and all in India. I'm asking you to do that because I care for you. I love you. And I think you as a nation are becoming poorer, morally poorer. You're becoming morally corrupt with what you're doing in keeping this imperial rule in India. And so I care for you, and so please do it for your own selves, And I've come to the United States at the age of 21, about 30 odd years ago. And I used to wince, when I would sometimes hear in the media and in the government speeches and all this notion of what's in America's interest, what's in America's interest. And I was like, what do you mean what's in America's interest? Should it not be that we really strive to craft foreign policy in a way that harmonizes humanity's interests with our nation's interests? And if those two things are not harmonized, is it possible that we have not yet fully worked out the mathematics of how to cohabit the earth? That something might be incomplete because nature is inherently meant to be interdependent, not independent, not just species competing, over things, but ultimately cohabiting and co-connecting and co-creating. And so that's what I see in these folks, is that they have this capacity to break through the divisions of their time and somehow form all kinds of bridges, at times even with their enemies. And it was patient work, it's what hard work. One of the things I also find with them is that in doing their work, there are three variables to keep in mind: the audience that you're working with, the agenda that you're trying to pursue, and then the arc of the journey in terms of what you'll be able to accomplish in month 1 or month 3 or month 9. And what I find with these leaders is that they're acutely aware that they cannot simultaneously control all three variables. You cannot say, here's the audience, here's my agenda, and I'm going to achieve it in this much time. You have to loosen the requirements for one or more of these. Either you say, I only have so much time, and therefore I'm going to shrink my audience from the outer circle to the inner circle, and I'm just going to work on reforming the inner circle. When I study the life of Jesus, his inner circle was his apostles. And there were things he taught, from everything I understand, there were things he taught the apostles, which he was not teaching to the bigger world out there, because they were too deep, the mystical, esoteric secrets of how to really go deep within and get to higher consciousness and all of that, which from my study, is there in the Gnostic Bibles and in deeper mystic practices in Christianity. Because at that time in human history, consciousness was so low that people would just have said that he was a madman, if he had talked about it at the broad level. So they start to segment their audiences between the inner circle, the outer circle, and the rest of humanity. And the language in which they speak and the agendas that they carry tends to be different for different groups. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. They have values, but they differentiate between their private values and their public values. Sometimes there's even a differentiation between your public values and your promoted values. And so I might have a private value that I say prayer before I eat. But when I'm at lunch in the office, I may not say a prayer before I eat openly by folding my hands, because it's just not common in America. But I might just quietly say that, within me. So it's a private value, it's not a public value. And it's certainly not a promoted value. It's not that I'm like going and telling people that you're bad if you don't pray before you eat. That would be a promoted value. Recently, in our modern times, while there's this hunger and quest for social justice, I've noticed in America, at least, some of the CEOs and organizations have gotten a little bit confused about what we meant to do in the present moment, and which values should be private and which should be public and which should be promoted. Abraham Lincoln, he was a teetotaler. He didn't drink. And when he was considering making the head of the army this general who was very successful in war, and he was looking for the next leader to help him, Ulysses Grant, somebody came and told him, but Mr. President, Ulysses Grant, he's often drunk. He's often drunk. And Lincoln said, well, in that case, let's figure out what brand of whiskey he drinks, and let's distribute it to the whole army, because he's winning so many battles. And this was a man who didn't drink, right? And so what I've learned from these figures is that you have to have a much more longer term, humble, meeting people where they are and inching them forward, towards the direction you want to help them take. But you can't go beyond, the physics of the day, whatever the physics of the day are, right? As to the level of opening and receptivity and all that people have, you have to be in fine-grained, in a fine-tuned understanding of that. And when you understand that, when the opportunity is big, you push things very quickly through. But when it's not there, you hold back and you pause and you think and you sense and you try to inspire and you segment inner circle versus outer circle. And then over time, amazing things work out. In the case of Gandhi, it took him 27 years of persuasion and growth and development. It took him 27 years to actually get to a point where he was able to convince the British and convince India to hold back on its aggression and unhappiness, and gradually get both parties to peacefully make that happen. Now, even that was not a perfect success, because there was the independence partition between India and Pakistan, and it led to a lot of bloodshed. And then he went around different parts of the country trying to quell that bloodshed. So they strive to achieve inner perfection, and they strive to do the best they can on the outside. You cannot expect to achieve outer perfection, because that is way outside your control. But the inner perfection that they strive to go for, Peter, you brought up my quest to bring a little bit of almost like mysticism into our approach to life. The best way for me to describe that inner perfection is through the lens of mysticism. They believe that there is a silent, loving, just, ever-present force out there in the universe. And it's like this ocean of creation through which you have emerged and I have emerged and all of us have emerged, and we are like drops in that ocean. And then what the Gandhis and Martin Luther Kings are trying to do, and the Mother Teresas and others, right, is that they are trying to, as best possible, be in tune with that force, and then ultimately be of service to that force. That's all they're striving to do. Mother Teresa would say, thank you for the credit you give me, but why should I get any credit at all for what has been done? Because I'm merely a pencil in the hand of God, right? Where God was writing a love letter to the world. Like, would you ever give credit to the pencil for the love letter that was written? So it's really beautiful when you start to study some of these very subtle behaviors and attitudes that these people took, that you realize that they were not just having, an openness to having this higher power somehow sort of like, come to them, but actually work through them, right, as best possible. And it required a lot of surrender. It required a lot of putting your ego aside, creating solitude and time for quiet attunement, and then having the courage to say, like, what my intuition has guided me, even though it seems to be a surprise to people around me, I will stand by the clarity of my convictions from within. And I will thoughtfully, diplomatically, lovingly, respectfully seek to bring others, to join me in that journey. But I'm not just going to sort of be a sheep, right, conforming to the mainstream fashions and standards of my time. I'm going to try to rise above that. And by envisioning a better, humanity, step by step, lovingly, respectfully, play the role that I'm meant to play. And then one day my flame will die, and that is perfectly fine too, because we are just linked. We are just a link in that chain, right? So that's my latest sort of work, is really studying the history of transformative change and trying to understand it from a deeper lens than purely mandating conduct on the outside, fixing who's in the prime minister's office or the president's office, or changing a certain law, thinking that is going to get us the lasting change we need. The lasting change that these kinds of people were able to forge, to me, I've seen, comes from molding character more than mandating conduct. Because there are so many zero-sum games out there otherwise, materially speaking. Some people have to give up in order for some people to receive. Some sacrifices have to be made. And the only way you get people there willingly, joyfully, rather than through just purely war, is when you elevate their consciousness, so that they take more joy in doing things that involve hardship and struggle and sacrifice than the joy of living a very secure and materially rich life. In the United States, there is a chart that came out recently from Gallup on how Americans see themselves as increasingly divided in terms of their values. And over the last 30 years, that percentage of Americans who see that we are mostly very divided in terms of most important value, in the last 30 years, that's been going up and up and up like this. Except there is one blip in the chart. And that one blip is, at some point, it's gone like this. So in 1 year, it's gone like this, right? And the percentage of Americans who in that year believe that most of us are united in our values went way up and then went back down, from there on. So can you guess what year that was in the last 30 years? Where suddenly, like, everybody got much more united.
Pandemic?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would have hoped it would have been the pandemic. Unfortunately, even during the pandemic, there were just, unfortunately, just a lot of divisions. Like, for example, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, pro-masking, anti-masking, and all of that. So it wasn't
War,
bad.
World War, World War II.
The last 30 years.
30 years, okay.
9/11.
Yes,
9/11,
it was
yeah.
9/11. So it was 9/11. Geraldo, I'll pass on this chart to you if you like. You could share it with all our friends here. But it was one of my recent LinkedIn posts. But it was amazing. In 2001 and 2002, 9/11 and the year afterwards, most Americans believe we have the same values. And then it started to go down again. And so I like to say that, if you think about it, like higher consciousness or performance, or exemplary leadership, whichever way you want to think about it, it's a state, not a trait. It's a state, not a trait. It's not that they're fundamentally good people and bad people, fundamentally good leaders and bad leaders. It's a state. So the potential is there in each of us to awaken to that state. And when we awaken to that state, instantly we get more sacrificing, more courageous, more creative, more compassionate, more everything when we are in that state. And when we are not in that state, then we're in a what's in it for me and how dare you and I hate you and all of that, right? Now, the insight, when you think of it that way, is that what these leaders were able to do is that temporarily they were able to put humanity under the spell of some inspiration. And during that period, humanity just rose willingly of their own accord to a higher state of cooperation, support, sacrifice, all that. On 9/11, there were literally men and women in blue from the police and the fire department who were walking up when the Twin Towers were crashing to save lives while other people were rushing down. And many of those people lost their lives. And nobody said, you were stupid, you were a fool. Or they didn't say, like, why should we do this? So people have it in them. And almost instantly at times, conditions can be created. Right? And once you create those conditions, then it's much easier to do the material work that you want to. If you want to tell people, stop consuming so much plastic. If you want to tell people, this income inequality is getting too vast, why don't you sacrifice some of your money to help support, others? If you want to tell people, stop fighting with each other, whatever you want to say. If you're trying to do it just through law, you might get compliance, you won't get commitment. When you're not looking, they'll go back to their old bad behavior. If you just try to talk to them about it or shout them down about it or look rudely at them and say, you're bad, now be good, you're going to get nowhere. But if you can somehow light them up and inspire them, I like to call it activate their core. The core is, in spiritual language, it'll be your soul. When you get people to soul wisdom, soul love, soul peace, then temporarily at least, whether it's just for a few seconds or a few hours or a few days or a few years or a few decades, you can get those people to do pretty special things. And for example, with Mother Teresa, she would often be criticized because apparently she spent time in the company of some like bad agents, like the dictator of Haiti or somebody who'd been convicted of this SNL, financial crime in the United States and all of that. But the way I see it is that she just had one business. Her business was to help alleviate the suffering of the dying, the diseased, and the destitute, right? And those were her brothers and sisters. And whoever was going to come to help her do that, she was just going to see the goodness in them for helping her do that. And if they had other bad things that they were doing for the rest of their lives, that was their problem. It wasn't her problem. Her problem was this. She had only energy and time to solve this problem. She can't solve every problem in the world. So you guys, who are fighting your wars, you go and kind of figure it out and learn to behave yourself. And it is my hope that by looking at examples like me and others, you'll change your ways. But at the moment, all I'm interested in is, if you and I are in a conversation, what can I do to get your support to set up a missionaries of charity in your country, in your country, in your country? And you might be a dictator, and you might be, communist, and you might be free democracy. That's fine. Those are things you take care of. But fundamentally, for me, it's the dying, the disease, and the destitute.
Yeah, and I just must say, for the benefit of the audience here, you have a great example in your book there with this thought experiment. You had an accident with your car. People are not stopping by to help you, and the one person that stops happened to be like a dictator that you really don't like, but you need to save your wife's life or whatever it could be. So of course you'll welcome the help at that moment, because it sort of like contributes to the greater good in that sense. So yeah, please carry on.
No, thank you, Peter. This was kind of mostly what I wanted to share as my introductory kind of thoughts, and I'm happy to go on, but I'm more interested also in just these kinds of comments and thoughts from you all, and what's on your mind, what questions or observations or reactions you have to things that I've just shared, and how should we take this conversation in a direction that'll be of most service to you all.
I'll start. Maybe Cassie, you're the expert in picking up questions, and people can also raise their hands, of course. But a reflection that I have is that two reflections, sort of like many of the things you mentioned here, sort of like long periods of stability, chaos, and then a new level up, maybe, hopefully. That's also in accordance, right, with the wisdom traditions, that everything is change, and nothing lasts forever in a sense. So everything is in constant flux, and also when talking about the sort of like it's a state, not a trait, and I think what we see here, you were talking about the division or low level of unity, and I think Krishnamurti, he stated this many times, that identifying with your race or sex or profession or whatever, it's the worst thing you can do. And I think sort of like when you are always dealing with that, then you get things like identity politics, you get culture wars, but if you can get into that state that, hey, I'm just a pen of God. It's sort of like let's just find this cohabitation equation and solve it, and then most of the problems would disappear. And I think it's so beautiful how you apply those old truths into our modern context, in a sense. Raldo, please. No,
true.
there was someone else. Björn first.
I have been thinking about this quite a long time, and I spent a little time after reading an article about how Jesus is considered too woke for a lot of Christians, because if you can't any longer preach the Sermon of the Mount to some Christian communities, which I think, I'm not, by the way, I consider myself something which is a Christian atheist, which I think, but what I thought about, and I've been reflecting about this, that maybe we need to speak of this in religious terms, even if we happen to be secular, because, and that's coming back to the community and identity, because we have been living in a very individualistic period. And perhaps now, when times are insecure, we need communities. And sometimes communities need to have like these simple rules. And that is what, for instance, religions provides humanity. You need some simple guidelines to live by. And maybe that is the task, to form those, so we can join with everyone, even with those that are our enemies, so to speak, because that is what's needed. You need collaboration across all lines and close those divisions. That's just a little bit of a reflection, but I wonder if this is in line with your thought or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the deepest level, the understanding I would draw from the scriptures pretty much across multiple faiths is that one good way of thinking about life is as a school. That the whole purpose of life is to invite us on a journey of growth towards our true home and our highest consciousness and our attunement to the universe. And if we were to take life as a classroom, then anytime that there is some friction, anytime that there is some resistance that we experience, that in that lies the seeds, of some breakthrough insight or understanding, etc. So in that sense, there is no such thing as an enemy. Now, that doesn't mean that we are being naively invited to just go around hugging everyone. I look at Abraham Lincoln, for example, as an extremely spiritual man, and yet he was at peace and comfortable with the idea of allowing his country to go to war rather than give up on his quest of wanting to move it beyond the institution of slavery. And so he had to pay a heavy cost. The country had to pay a heavy cost, and he was at peace with that. So sometimes people feel like the notion of invoking anything to do with religion or spirituality tends to make us a little softer in terms of our attitudes and approaches towards the messy egos and constraints and adversaries in the world. But one way, by giving them examples like Lincoln, I hope to open them up to the facts that you can have fierce resolve, and you can even go to the ultimate extent of sometimes recognizing the inevitability of a righteous war. The Civil War in America, would be a righteous war. What the difference is that you bring a different inner attitude towards it. You do not bring an attitude of enmity. You do not bring an attitude of retribution, of wanting to inflict pain or suffering on others. You bring an attitude of, again, just righteous duty, of a desire to want to be of service to humanity by making the hard calls that in your position, wherever you were put, you were meant to make in order to kind of push humanity to the next level, right? So if you bring that cleanliness and purity of heart, then you can kind of play those games in the right way with the right attitude. In terms of the role of religion then, and these practices that you were talking about that help us form some kind of a blueprint for how to connect and live together. I love that idea as one of the positive aspects of good, stable, religion-based societies. I also think that it's worth recognizing that we carry in us the baggage of all kinds of religious strife that we have faced in many parts of the world in the past. Christians are fighting Christians, Christians are fighting Muslims, Hindus have had their caste system, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bunch of that, and that is what has given religion in part a bad name today. And in modern times, we have decided that we should banish it from education, we should banish it from government and from organizations, because people tend to fight with each other. And then they tend to get very ideological that, my scripture and my prophet is the right one and yours the wrong one, and so you're going to be damned, if you don't convert to mine. That used to be the old world. Today, what I'm noticing is that many people are, of course, beyond faith, like they have just walked away from the church because they're just not feeling happy or at peace with what they were hearing there. And then there are others who are in their faith, be they Muslims or Jews or Hindus or Christians or Buddhists or what have you. They're in their faith. And at the same time, they are not ready anymore to accept any preacher within their faith telling them that people who are of other faiths are damned. Because, their own daughter, is married to somebody from that other faith. Or when they come to work, they meet people of so many faiths. And some of those people, they really like them. And some of the people in their own faith, in their own church, they find that they respect them less than they respect some of those people. So over the course of the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's been such a interfaith exposure that people have had that naturally this kind of very divisive dogma of the past, of the rigid sort of, views that institutional faiths have had, institutional faiths, not necessarily individuals, institutional faiths have had. Many people today who are actually going to the synagogues and the mosques and the churches, they are quietly starting to reject that dogma. They might sit there politely. They might actually love their faith and the scripture and the community because of all the benefits it gives them, like you were just saying, Bjorn, like all those shared rituals and practices. But at the same time, they are not ready to accept some of the more limiting dogmas that suggest that there is only one path up the mountaintop. I mean, to the extent that even today, the Pope, right, and the Catholic Church has been on record in the last few months to say, like, he's trying to nudge the Catholic community a little bit more into that open space, officially, right? Unofficially, I know many Catholics who would never look at me and saying, Hitendra, because you don't believe that Jesus is the only Son of God, you're messed up. I know many Catholics who are lovely people and who look at me, as though like, I respect and appreciate that you meditate and you follow your guru and, all that. So, and he's trying to do that now institutionally, and for which he's getting a lot of flack as well. Not all the people are very happy, but he said something like, it was very delicately chosen words, chosen words. He said that, I don't believe that I have enough intelligence to understand the mind of God and to judge as to whether God, could accommodate multiple paths or made Jesus the only path to salvation. He said, I don't know if I feel like I have the intelligence to judge that. It's such a beautiful, little subtle invitation for people to open up to that interfaith kind of appreciation and respect, which, by the way, I'm seeing that in the young people all the time. They already have it. So to me, it's very energizing to see that people change and reform faster than institutions. And we are seeing that change happen in people, even while it's not yet happening officially in the institutions. And I think that gives us license and an opportunity to bring ideas of mysticism and God and faith and spirituality more actively back into our collectives, whether it's the collective in education and government and organizations and communities like this, knowing that we can approach it from a place of, what Mother Teresa said once. She said, I love all faiths and I am in love with my faith.
Yeah. Geraldo.
I have two questions, but they are a little bit interrelated. The first one is when we are dealing with the meta-crisis in this community. So we see a lot of sense of urgency. We don't have much time. I mean, if you take climate change, it's here and now, right? And AI is another example. Maybe it goes so fast, and we don't know where the consequences yet. And so there is, I see, at least in myself, a little bit of an anxiety. And so when you say that Gandhi took 24 years, so it brings to my mind, do we have 24 years, right? So, and connected to that, it's more a personal thing, right? So when I became a little bit of a junkie in terms of American election. So I followed everything, and I got so disappointed that Trump won, and I really even a little bit depressed, to be honest. And how do we handle that? Because I'm just Geraldo, so I feel really that the guy's an idiot. And nowadays, I think Elon Musk is also an asshole, and so on and so forth. But what you're saying is that maybe I am myself contributing also to the polarization somehow, right? So I don't know if you have any advice.
Yeah, a few thoughts. I mean, first of all, on the environment front, one of the things that I'm finding absent from the more vocal environmentalists out there is that most of the times we are pointing the finger outwards. We are pointing the finger at governments, we are pointing the finger at corporations. But meanwhile, I mean, these corporations are just profit-making machines, right? And they make profits on the basis of putting products out there which we buy. We make choices to buy those products, right? So I'm seeing very little discussion about what do we need to do to fundamentally change our consumerist behaviors and live simpler lives. Because if we live simpler lives, automatically there will be a depression in the demand for all the kinds of things that lead to global warming and everything else. So it's really more, to me, a problem of the values of society. And it's not that like there are a few institutions to be fixed and then automatically things will happen. I mean, America tried to do that by bringing Biden into power, 4 years ago, as a very pro-environmental guy. And he immediately went on record to say that, fossil fuel companies and Saudi Arabia, you're like bad, and he started to suppress a little bit, their output. And suddenly energy prices went through the roof. And the people who suffered were the very poor people, because the rich people could still afford energy. The poor people couldn't. So are the fossil fuels companies really our enemies? When we are the ones who are demanding to live a life where we feel like every person in my house should have his or her own car, and I should be able to fly anywhere in the world, rather than live simply in a farm somewhere and, be very joyful in just the company of the community around me without feeling the need to go to, different parts of the world all the time. I mean, I'm just making this up, right? But that's, that's just kind of like one thing I would like to propose we inject more into the conversation, that it's about societal change, not just institutional, reform with a few people. The second thought that is coming to my mind is, when you talk about the worry part, Geraldo, I do agree with you that the pace and the scale of the, way change is happening today is very destabilizing, right, relative to where things were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. The power that, it reminds me, Einstein, he observed this after the atomic bomb came into existence. He said it is becoming appallingly clear that our technology has advanced much further than our humanity. Today with drones, with AI, CRISPR, I mean, we have vast power, through the technologies that we've unleashed in the world. Do we have the moral and ethical, strength and wisdom, right, to use these responsibly, right? So those are big questions. And the only thing that I can invoke, because I'm not a larger than life thinker or anything, is the teachings that I picked up from, this mystic Yogananda, who I mentioned in the book as well. I've drawn a lot from spiritually. And Yogananda refers to the Great Flood, which is there in the Old Testament, right, as one example of dissolution. So he says that over the course of creation, it goes in cycles, and there are partial dissolutions, and then there are more like bigger dissolutions. I don't remember whether the Great Flood was considered a partial dissolution in his language or a more major dissolution. And these dissolutions come when society gets so unhinged, that you kind of need to do a reset. It's like sometimes your computer just goes so slow that you just have to reboot it, right? So that's like the reboot that happens. And so in some ways it's in your hands and my hands and it's in our hands as to whether, we are going to take society to a point where there will be a partial dissolution or, or a major dissolution, or whether we'll find some way to messily or gracefully, awaken to the responsibility we owe the planet and to each other to tame some of these baser impulses and to get ourselves to, moderate and redirect our consumption and to reform our institutions and to get out of there. And on that front, I don't know if anybody's in a position to predict. It is possible that a major crisis could come. It could come in the form of a catastrophic war, tremendous economic decline, and environmental rush of just like all kinds of earthquakes and floods that just kind of cause chaos, just like the Great Flood. From my vantage point, the reason why I'm not apprehensive is that I do believe in the continuity of existence and of life and of creation. And I know that there will be a future even beyond that, even if that moment comes. And the worst thing that can happen is that I'll just die a little bit earlier than I would have otherwise, or my daughter will, and we all ultimately die. So if you die earlier or later, at the end of the day, you have to confront and make peace with that transition into the afterlife. I would love to use the rest of my time on this planet to avert that possibility and to create a more graceful transition. And at the same time, if that's not where we end up, that's also okay. Anyway, so that's the kind of thought process in my mind, that this is a drama. It's been going on for a while. The Great Flood also happened, and Noah had to take those animals into his ship, and yet we came out of it, and we'll come out from this too.
Thank you, Hitendra. I hope, Geraldo, that you feel much calmer now.
Thank you.
Kasi, please.
I think that, yeah, I was trying to build some of the questions that we have in the chat, and there are two of them that I wanted to bring up that they fit very naturally to what you were saying right now. Adriano asked first if this point about stability or the meta crisis, is it just one more cycle, or do you feel that now it's worse and out of the normal compared to others? And following that one, also Johan asked about the changes. If that was the case, the changes of evolution are not always smooth, and sometimes they are destructive. So what can we do? I mean, we can take the deterministic view of, well, this is going to happen, so we don't have to do anything because it's going to happen no matter what. Or we can take the position of perhaps there's something in our hands. What can we as individuals and we as a community do? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, see, if any of us believe that we can individually turn the tide of history, then that's hubris, right? So it actually can be quite humbling, but also quite peacemaking to recognize that this game is not in your hands. It's in the hands of some higher power, whatever the equilibrating force is in the universe. And by the way, if you are really worried about these issues right now on planet Earth, there is a higher power that has been worrying for millennia about protecting our Earth from other forces which are much larger than global warming. For instance, just massive meteorites that could strike the Earth and just completely destroy the planet, right? So there is research to show that Jupiter, as this really large planet out there, has such a strong gravitational pull that it is constantly shielding the Earth from huge meteorites that otherwise were earthbound and could have destroyed life on Earth, right? So somebody put Jupiter out there in the system of creation, and so let's not believe that you and I have ever had the strength and the wisdom to be able to completely hold humanity together, because we're just a small drop in the ocean, right? But let's be so what happened is, I share the story in the book. When Mother Teresa won the Nobel Prize, she was in Rome, and this journalist was very inquisitive. He was saying, Mother Teresa, he said, there are millions and millions of people suffering from poverty today. So what impact has your work actually had after all these years? I mean, like, how do you feel about the fact that there's still millions and millions of people below the poverty line? And she just looked at him and she took a deep breath and she said, if I may, she said, I have never tried to change the world. I've never tried to change the world. She said, I've just tried to be a pure drop of water in which God's light can shine. And she said, you could also be a pure drop of water, and then there will be two of us. And she said, are you married? And he says, yes. Then she says, okay, then why don't you ask your wife also to be a pure drop of water? Then there'll be three of us. And she says, do you have children? He says, yes, mother, I have 3 children. She says, great, ask them also to be pure drops of water. And then there will be 6 of us. And so to me, a way to make peace in the context of these very heartfelt and beautiful expressions of your feelings, right? Which I know come from a deeply cared for place, deeply felt place. I know that from the line of questioning, Kazi, you're just sharing from our friends here and knowing Geraldo for all these years and know how pure-hearted and deeply felt, these sentiments are for you. But like, to me, the way to respond to that is to recognize that you in this life have been given a canvas. You're meant to paint the best painting you can on that canvas and then gracefully walk away, when the time comes. So just focus on your sphere of influence. Just focus on maximizing what leadership you can bring to your moments, and then leave the rest of it to that collective wisdom in nature, right? Because it's already taken us to this place. Imagine how hopeless people must have felt during the Second World War. Imagine how hopeless they must have felt during some of the earlier pandemics when they didn't even have the speed with which they could move and generate, new kind of medicines and things, right? So we've come a long way, and let's just do our part, right? And if each of us does our part, like that drop of water, it'll spread, right?
Thanks. Claes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
By the way, I just want to share one thing. This doesn't mean that we lack ambition and that we don't try to maximize, right? And think big, because when I study the Gandhis and the Mother Teresas, I mean, they were extremely ambitious, right? So it's almost a yin yang, right? Where you try to scale as much at the right time in the right way, but you're also at peace that ultimately this game is in somebody else's hand, and you'll do your part, and then you move on. Okay, sorry. Let's come back to you, Klaus. I think you were saying something.
Yes. Yeah, I don't have a question. I really just want to say that I like you very much, everything you say, and I feel I have been thinking the same. So a few things that I liked here is, I think I like the positive outlook. I don't believe the world will crash in this time, or maybe it does, but it could just. Sorry, am I? You hear me? Okay. Yeah. I mean, maybe it can, but maybe there must be many times in the past that it could has as well as happened also. So you began with the perspective of 100 or 200 years. Where will we be? And I like that is a good perspective. Mostly now we talk about, I don't know, 2030, and that's when things are decided what the future will be. Either we are lost or we are not. But I think also a few hundred years is a good perspective to think a lot will happen, but there will also be a lot left to happen. So that was a good time perspective. And then I liked this what you said about private, public, and promoted values. And also the balance of the three aims, or what I can call it. You said, you have your, what did you say? Your target, your aim, and
the audience, the agenda, and the arc, of the journey.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so true. I think that you cannot do the best in all three. So you have to think, okay, what suits now? What is best for me? What is best for the situation? So that was also very good. And then relating a little bit back to Björn, who said maybe the religious world is good in the way that it's quite simple. But we had another 4D conversation here some time ago where we talked about complexity. And I can sort of also think that it is very complex. The world is very complex and will continue to be complex. So maybe that's a bit of a difference from the past. But then again, when you are trying to navigate in a complex environment, that's exactly when you need to be able to be a little bit realistic, but also positive, and keep these balances like between the private, public, and promoted values and those three aims. So So I interpret what you say as you need to be able to keep a few things in your mind at the same time and then balance the different things and the different perspectives correctly or in an optimal way. So yeah, I this is what I heard, and I like it very much.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate your responding in that way to these thoughts, and I can see you've been doing, you know, a lot of rich and deep thinking, both for yourself and then as a community here from the comments you make. You know, on this complexity front, it reminds me of a thought from a very mystical kind of mathematician in India called Ramanujan. You know, in the 20th century, he was one of the most prolific mathematicians, and he had hardly gained much formal education, you know, beyond a point. He was an accountant, but then he wrote to, you know, Hardy, who was a very famous mathematician of his time at Cambridge University, and Hardy got these letters with these incredible equations, and he was just saying, like, look, I've just kind of figured these out, and I want to talk to somebody who really knows mathematics. And so Hardy invited him and sponsored him to come to Cambridge, and he spent some of his most prolific years there then, and he died when he was just in his 30s. But he once said, he said, to me, the number 1 represents the essential, like the essence of spirit. The number 1 represents the essence of spirit, and the number infinity represents the infinite outer expressions of spirit. You know, so in the spirit of embracing paradox, you know, maybe we can recognize that there are moments when we should strive for getting to the essence.
Yeah.
And in getting to the essence, we should be able to radically simplify and see things in a very simple and pure light.
Yeah.
And then the opposite is also true, that when we get into the battlefield and the arena, we have to be able to see the 1,000 things, you know, that are there. Lao Tzu, you know, he said it beautifully once. He said something, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the precise quote, in the I Ching. He says, dive deep within to the very core of your being, and then on the outside, you will be able to do the 1,000 things.
Yeah.
Right. So in fact, like, the more you go there, the more you become free of identity, you know, as you know, we were just discussing a few minutes ago, you become free of, you know, these shackles and constraints, and you can be nimble, adept, attuned, constantly evolving, right? So, and that gives you nuance and complexity on the outside.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Thanks. And also, I mean, there's a great Netflix movie about the life of this Indian mathematician you were speaking about, Hitendra. I don't recall the name of the movie as such, but it's a beautiful movie.
Yeah, the man who knew infinity. The man who knew.
Yeah, exactly,
the man
exactly.
Who knew infinity.
True.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Kathy.
Yeah, we have another. Thank you, and very insightful everything that we are coming up with here. We have a challenging discussion here online about, we know about the world and the history and the leaders in a context that perhaps now it's a little bit different because of not only the complexity but also the connectivity and also the polarization. So do we have, and here also it connects with some things that are happening in artificial intelligence. We know for sure that knowing the past is not necessarily a good thing to predict the future, and just taking historical trends is not necessarily a good view of what might happen because the context now is different from before. What should we take into account from the past to help us better, and what should we try to learn from the new, the complexity and the connectivity that everyone has, and the social spheres of influence in which people get deep into silos of information? How has the actual context changed so that we have to unlearn from the past as well?
Yeah, I used to not have much of an interest in history, you know, for a long time, and then I started to study these movement makers and change makers, and I fell in love with history at some level. But in doing so, I also realized how much of history is written at times through a very, distorted lens, right? And so, Gandhi, for example, used to often be challenged. So there was this young firebrand freedom fighter in India. He once came up to Gandhi and he said, "Mr. Gandhi, you speak with a lot of eloquence, and I can see that you have a great command over the scriptures, but you're not really a student of history, because here you are preaching revolution on non-violent, lines. But if you look at any of the history of revolutions, the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, American Revolution, they were bloody. It was not easy to get, a ruling power to just kind of voluntarily kind of leave, the riches or whatever they were doing. So you don't seem to be much of a knowledge of history." And Gandhi looked at him and smiled. He said, "Actually, I'm not sure if you have much knowledge of history." He said, "Because if you actually look at history, you will find that just because something has not happened in the past doesn't mean that it can't happen now." Isn't that interesting? So two people had both read history, but one had concluded from history that history always ends up demonstrating to you that humanity can do unimaginable new things. And history proves it, right? And the other was saying, like, "But we've never done this." So similarly, Gandhi once also said, he said, if you look at the way we study history, he said, it's mostly about people who, grab power and then they fought with each other to expand their kingdoms, and that's history. He said, we never talk about how much, in people's homes, they might have been very loving to each other and selfless with each other. We never talk about that as history. He said, if two brothers fight and then if they litigate and they go to court, that makes it into the newspaper. But he said, two brothers fight and then they find a way to make up and they hug and they just, give in to each other and they move on. That never makes it to the newspaper. So what I like learned from these kinds of reflections is that actually in the microcosm is the macrocosm, i.e., almost like in any moment, in any situation, in any culture, in any moment in history, there is coded in that all the core principles of life and humanity. They're all there. And if you can tune in to those deeper truths, then you start realizing that anything and everything connects to anything and everything, right? And that's like a beautiful quest to be on. So I'm more drawn to that quest, right? Where you will not come and tell me, Hitendra, why are you sharing a story of Lincoln? That was in the 1800s. Now we are in the 21st century. Our problems are different. No, my God. In that moment is coded all the secrets of human drama and of human triumph and possibilities, right? So that's how I like to think about it.
Thanks. And I would never claim to be like an enlightened being, but at least I've started to waking up, and I noticed sort of like maybe some here people know about Ken Wilber. I think he phrased it beautifully. That and let's start also with another quote first, sort of like that. It goes like this: it's really hard to discern between a stone cold slacker and an enlightened being, because they seem to do nothing, but for completely different reasons, right? The enlightened being sees that everything is perfect as it is, basically, and that also goes into like Ken Wilber's integral theory in a sense. And it sounds wacky if you're really, really worried about everything, but if you zoom out, well, we have Jupiter here, and sort of like we still go around the sun, and things will work out. But also sort of like this thing that waking up is one thing, and then we also need to grow up, we need to clean up, and eventually also either, we can go and sit down under a tree or into a cave or go to a mountaintop, or we show up. And showing up means sort of like then acting in the world as you are suggesting, being that drop through which God can shine. And I really like that. And one personal reflection also that just came to me is also, I think it's wonderful that from the old wisdom traditions and in all mystical branches of all religions, basically, we have enlightenment. And then in the 1600s, 1700s, we had another type of enlightenment. And I see those as parallels to what you're saying, Hitendra. So like the one enlightenment is for inner development, and the outer, the Renaissance enlightenment was to make impact in the world as such, right? So it's enlightenment squared, basically, in that sense. And I think we can find hope in that if we start moving it, because we forgotten about the first enlightenment, basically. But if we can integrate that into the second enlightenment, then I think we are golden.
I love that frame. I love that frame. You know, I like to think about sort of fusing the spiritual with the material, or being sort of like a mystic in the material world. You know, that's the ultimate goal, and that will get us to create harmony and integration in the world. And the Western world in general, not necessarily, you know, universally, but in general, has taken a more organized, analytical, rational, scientific, outer kind of approach to understanding truth. And it's done incredible things with that, and that enlightenment, you know, chapter in Western philosophical thought was in some ways shaped by that emphasis towards trying to organize society and think about human rights and everything from the outside, you know, from like the conduct of people and the fairness with which we should be living and honoring each other and all that. And then the Eastern traditions, you know, tend to kind of go within, you know, to the soul and, you know, of things, and then discover things from a different lens. And India is an example of a nation I'm familiar with in the East that has been specializing in that. Somehow over the last like X thousand years, it's kind of lost its way a little bit on the material discipline side, you know, but it has retained some of those deeper spiritual secrets that you can find in some of its more exalted teachers and writers and truth seekers in the Himalayas, and, you know, some of its ashrams and things. But as somebody who has gone back and forth between East and West and has been blessed to, you know, be exposed to the best of each, I have that same, you know, quest and hunger that you just talked about. That for me, I feel the world will be a lot more whole when, to use your words, you know, we combine the pursuit of inner enlightenment with outer enlightenment. And by the way, that's also what Steve Jobs, you know, Steve Jobs said something of that. He said, I figured out really early in my life that the purpose of life is not to die the richest man in the cemetery, you know, but it is to pursue some kind of enlightenment.
Exactly. And I think also, maybe you know of him, but there's a great thinker called Ian McGilchrist. His magnum opus is called The Matter with Things. And he studied left and right brain, and sort of like he before that, he wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary, and it's based on this metaphor story about, you know, this emissary for the king that thinks that he is sort of like the one with power and that does things, and he forgets himself. He almost think of himself as a king until the king actually corrects him. And no, you're just my emissary. And that's, McGilchrist, he views the left and right brain a little bit like that. And I always forget which part does what, but sort of like we have one part of the brain that actually mainly is focused on rational things and also on details, but it forgets the whole. And you need to actually combine left and right brain thinking, but never cease responsibility to just pure rationality. We have in modern society sort of like crowned rationality into the king, but that's not the best way, because you forget about the wholeness in a sense. Sorry, Geraldo.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
thinking you brought up Steve Jobs, and I learned through one of your articles, Hitendra, the last gift of Steve Jobs. That was the autobiography of Yogi. which means that he was a very spiritual person, right? But at the same time, I just want to bring back this with ambitious, right? Martin Luther King and even Steve Jobs talked about making a dent on the universe, right? So I think it's maybe it's both the drop in the water, but also like you said, the desire for something really really great, right? At least that's how I read making a dent on the universe. Sometimes I feel isn't it too much? It's big words from Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah, beautiful point. Beautiful point. And see, the funny thing is, it's this paradox, which is the more we are able to humble ourselves, the more we are able to like not take pride in the degrees and distinctions we have in life, we clear up our inner agenda, we clear up our mind, we clear up our emotional state. And when we clear it up, then to Peter's point about, intuition versus the rational mind, right? The intuition starts to speak more clearly to us. And I talk in my book about when we think about intuition, it's important to have each of us ask ourselves, what do I think truly the capacities of my brain are? Is my brain like the hard drive of a computer, and I keep pumping knowledge into it through the books I read and the movies I watch, and then basically intuition is only finding some creative linkages between those things and sparking something based on the sum total of all the knowledge I've absorbed and put into my hard drive? Or is my brain like a browser, and it's just an access point to infinite wisdom that exists in the ether, exists in the universe? And when you look at the Gandhis, you look at the Mother Teresas, you even look at some of the most creative artists of times, right? So Puccini, Brahms, Alfred Tennyson, Picasso. And I've shared quotes and reflections from these people in the last chapter in my book on transcendence. But you find that these people, they saw their brains as a browser. And Puccini says it beautifully. When he was asked how he composed, Madame Butterfly, which is an incredible opera of his, incredible opera, right? He says, look, you need to have the craftsmanship, right, of a composer. Like if you don't understand music and know music and have that mastery, I mean, obviously you're not going to get very far. You need that. He says, but then you don't compose. Something composes through you. He says, because what I have to do, he says that I have to just whip up. I have to whip up this passion. I have to whip up this hunger, this desire, right? And then I have to step aside. And then it starts to write through me, right? Now, on the one hand, this is a very humbling thing of being able to kind of step aside, put your own expectations and all that, because you have to lose a sense of control over the the linear flow of things. But when you do that in those moments, then you allow insight from a higher plane to flow through you, right? And in that way, by going to zero, you have become infinite, right? By going to zero, you've actually become infinite, right? And that is why, like one of these other mystics, Rumi, right, who I love, right? This Sufi mystic from the Islamic traditions of Turkey. He actually said the more complete, I think, thought that we should have around this when I said you're a drop in the ocean, because to your point, Geraldo, the full statement that he made in his case was, he says, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the whole ocean in a drop.
Thank you. And also maybe to you, Geraldo, I think cling on to Hitendra's analogy here with you've been given the canvas. It's up to you to sort of like cover it. And that's all you can do, really. And maybe for all of us, be careful about making a dent in the universe. There are many people that has tried to do dents that are not in a good way. Just trust that things will happen. And what you have started here, Geraldo, that's certainly a good way to paint a canvas. It's a beautiful canvas. Kasi?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for being so generous with your time, because we are already a little bit over. But when you were talking about this last part, I realized, moving from the enlightenment, from external and internal, to then the impact, and for some years there has been an interest in people and companies to build towards purpose-driven approach, which in essence it's very good, but for the majority of the companies have become now like a lip service of showing that we are doing something that in reality we are here to make money and that's it, but we want to show that we are purpose. Now there's a new phrase, which is from purpose to legacy, which sounds like even better, closer to the transcend that you just mentioned. But then reading and listening now to you, it seems that those ones that actually reach a legacy are those that are not in search for a legacy. Kind of the humbleness is crucial for all this part. So you talked a lot about empathy, you talked a lot about humbleness. Is it true that the better approach to actually do something is not actively to pursue it, but simply have a journey?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question to ask. Beautiful question to ask. I have studied that at the individual level, but now that you ask it, I'm very intrigued to see how it might apply at the institutional level, at the organizational level. So I'm gonna be thinking about it. I'm going to be thinking about it. At the individual level, for sure, there is some really fascinating logic that we can bring to the power of surrender, of non-attachment. So I talk about that in the Living with Wisdom chapter in my book. There are these 5 energies in my book: purpose, wisdom, growth, love, and self-realization. And I dedicate one chapter on living with that energy for each of the 5 energies. And in that chapter, for each of the energies, I've got 5 stages. 5 stages for purpose, 5 for wisdom, 5 for love, and everything. Now, in the 5 stages for wisdom, how do you acquire and practice wisdom in life? The quest for truth-seeking in all situations, even in complex, decision-making, context and all that. One of those 5 stages, the 4th of the 5 stages, is actually surrender, is non-attachment. How can you give up obsession and attachment to your beliefs, to your thoughts, to your emotions, so that you can look at things from a very, very accepting and open and, balanced light, right? And I give some logic there for why, when you are non-attached, you actually end up succeeding even more. Instead of you pursuing success, success pursues you, right? And one reason is that you become less anxious. So, performance anxiety, which can often be very paralyzing, you don't face that because you're not looking at a scorecard all the time to say, how am I doing? How am I doing? What my results like this quarter and all of that. And so you can actually play your best game because you can put all your attention and mind to just like playing your best game. And naturally, then the results come, right? The second is that when you get too obsessed with results, then you get complacent in good times. The whole tide is rising and you think like, I'm a genius. You're not a genius. The whole tide was rising. The economy was doing well, or something, right? Or the markets were very partial to you, or the economy was very stable. So you don't end up doing a lot of learning and improving in good times because you just feel like you're a genius. And then again, in bad times, you start feeling very beaten down. You have low morale. You're, not motivated. But if you're truly living with non-attachment, then you wouldn't get so, flip-flop in your emotional state. So those are just 2 examples of about 7 or 8 logical arguments one can make that actually people who operate with that non-attachment, that's the breakfast of champions, so to say. They end up actually getting to a better outcome.
Thanks. And also, I think adding to that, both on the legacy side, I'll come to that, but also this non-attachment to the outcome. I saw a video about a great martial artist, and the commentator he gave me a new term, and he said, because he was so superior to everyone else in the ring, and you could see that he was having fun in the ring. And the commentator said that this guy, he's outcome independent. He doesn't care about the outcome. He just has so incredibly fun doing it, and he won all the time. And also talking about legacy, and I don't know if this story is correct or not, so please fact check me, but it's still beautiful. And that is Alfred Nobel, and it's it's these times now with the Nobel Prize, that his brother died, and the newspapers thought it was Alfred that had died. So the truth came out what people thought of him, and he could actually see what people saw as his legacy, and he was basically a merchant of war. That's when he decided to create the Nobel Prize. That's when he started thinking about his legacy, and he was in a position to also kind of change that.
That's a great story, and from everything I know, it's a true story. I was convinced enough about it that I also mentioned that in my book. I think it's a great story. I also mentioned in my book another story to build on what you just said, Peter, on Alexander, like Alexander the Great, right? So here he was, taught by Aristotle, ultimately the most conquering hero, of history, right? With the amazing kind of way he was able to go all the way through to India and even conquer land in India. And at the same time, when he reached India, he encountered these, what they call Naga Swamis, which are naked yogis. They don't even wear any clothes. They still exist today in India, in the Himalayas. And he was very fascinated. Like, they were living with no real possessions, and he was like, who are these guys? And they seem so joyous and enlightened. So he talked to their leader, and he got very drawn to wanting a little bit more of that, in his life. And then, one of them, he befriended him, and he actually was making his way back with Alexander's army when he passed away. But the reason I share the story is because Alexander's mother had told him that you were born to rule over the world. Very early he was told, you were born of immaculate conception. There was this god Zeus, and he just like had this bolt of lightning on my stomach, and it became a womb, and then I bore you. So you came out of immaculate conception, and you were born to rule the world. And he just like had internalized that. And his way of ruling the world was to conquer more and more land, right? But of course, we know what happened then. His army got very tired. They started to protest. He started to retreat from India. By the way, when this yogi who he had, befriended died on the way back, in his final breath, he was telling Alexander, I will see you in Babylon. And everybody was like super confused. What do you mean, I'll see you in Babylon? You're dying. And the yogi died. And then a little while later, on his way back to Greece, there was a rebellion of some kinds in Babylon. So he had to redirect himself there, and he went to Babylon, and he contacted tuberculosis or something, and he died. And so then people realized, oh, that's what that guy meant when he said that I'll see you in Babylon. So, but the reason I wanted to share that is because what if Alexander had listened even more to the yogis and their ideas that, look, you don't have to own all this land. You don't own any land. The only land you own is the square foot that you're standing on or that you lie on, and everything belongs to a higher power, and you're going to leave it very soon anyway. If he had listened to their wisdom, what if he had changed his ways and he'd become a different kind of king and all of that? So before you think of your legacy, just like Peter's story with Alfred Nobel, right? Like, I hope and pray that these organizations are first trying to answer the harder questions about what truly is, the role of an organization in today's time, and what is the future of capitalism, and what are we meant to manifest? And then you think of a legacy, right? But if you think of a legacy in a more narrower frame, like Alfred Nobel, before he saw, like, what the hell, this is how people are going to think of me, because I thought I was a genius as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, and all that, but people are thinking of me as a merchant of war and death. So anyway, yeah.
Thanks, Hitendra. And if we don't have any more questions, Kasi, do we have more questions in the chat?
No, we don't. But it was that was an opening for another whole session about corporations, and
Exactly.
that we'll have to leave for another day.
Definitely. And Hitendra, I really want to thank you both for your time here, your generous sharing of your hard-earned wisdom, and also for writing your book. And at least to me, I don't know you really, but I've seen you also in a couple of other interviews and now interacting with you today. Thank you for being the person you are and the way you're showing up. It's amazing. And thank you for everyone else attending today. We have recorded this session as with most of our previous sessions, and we're building a YouTube channel where we want more people to partake in the insights and the wisdoms in these talks. And so thank you for contributing to that, Hitendra. And thanks for everyone joining tonight.
No, thank you so much. I feel really honored to be in the midst of such deep thinkers as you all, and Kathy and Peter and Geraldo and all of you who have shared in chat. I'm enjoying and absorbing that. Is it possible to get a download of chat or something like that? Because
Yes.
Okay, because I'd love to
Yes.
be able to read offline without delaying you all today. But I wish you all really well and have a blessed holiday season. And I look forward to staying connected with you all. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Bye. Bye.